This episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Seller's Resource at thesellersresource.com. This is an Etsy audio tutorial service that I have created for Etsy sellers, and I will have a link to more information in the show notes for this episode. The episode is also made possible by listeners like you. I've said before, I just ask the questions and I do the technical stuff in the background, but sellers like you and service providers to the Etsy community are the ones that make this podcast possible. And if you would like to be featured on the podcast, please go to convome.com and click on the Be My Guest tab. There's a short form there that you can fill out, and that will let me know that you want to be featured on the podcast. Just hit submit and then I'll take it from there. And I just want to say thank you in advance for contributing to and being part of the Etsy Conversations podcast community.
Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode of the podcast. My guest this week is Danielle Spurge of the Merriweather Council. Danielle was able to grow her embroidery business from $8,000 in her first year to, get this, $74,000 by her second year, and then beyond that. Now, Danielle spends her time as a craft business consultant and a podcast host. We're going to talk about her podcast as well. And she helps entrepreneurial makers leverage their talents and also create sustainable craft-based businesses. Danielle, thank you so much for being my guest and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, chat with you today.
Same here. I'm grateful to have you. And Danielle and I were just talking off the air. We actually met at the Etsy Up conference back in, that was 2016, right?
It was.
It
yes.
was, yes.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, did you enjoy that conference?
I did. I actually was only able to go the first day. I know it was 2 days, but while I was there, I did really enjoy it. Yeah. I wish they would do it again.
I know. I did too. And I talked with someone else a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and she was also at the conference. I didn't meet her there, but we both agreed that Etsy needs to do that again. So hopefully they will.
Yeah, it was super fun. It was like just the right amount of people.
Yes.
It wasn't like super overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great.
And they
Good
fed
food.
us.
Yes, and the food was good.
Yes. Food is a good thing.
Yes.
All right. So Danielle, before we get into it, can I just have you give us a little introduction to who you are and the Merriweather Council?
Of course. So as you know, I'm Danielle. I am the chief bossy pants at the Merriweather Council, where I run my product-based business right alongside my service-based business. So I am still a maker in business, selling my custom hand embroidery online, which I've done for the past 8 years. And I also help other makers, like you said, grow and sustain their craft-based business. I started my embroidery business right out of college in 2010. I was supposed to go to graduate school, and I, at the very last minute, like literally the day before I graduated college, I decided not to go, and I started my business instead. And I grew my business over time, mostly through Etsy, and then, of course, branched out into other avenues. And I just really have always enjoyed making things. I love to make my work and sell my work. I love the process of making. So for me, it's not really always about the end result. It's more about the process of making and the process of doing embroidery. And then over time, I had a lot of people asking me questions, reaching out to me. You know, back in the day, Etsy teams that did like treasuries and all that was a really big deal. And through my teams and stuff, people were always emailing me, convoing me, asking, how am I doing what I'm doing? How am I finding success with what I'm doing? And I was always chatting shop with people. I love to do that and strategize with people, talk about their work, talk about my work, talk about shop and all this stuff. And then in 2015, I was like, let me do this in a more organized fashion, like with actual intention
Yeah.
and strategy. And so I started, doing one-to-ones and shop critiques, and I have my Etsy course, and just really love helping other people do what I was able to do for myself,
Mhm.
because I feel like it's so much more exciting to be part of multiple success stories, even in a
Yeah.
small capacity, than just my own.
Yeah.
So it's been really awesome to do both of these things. And for me, they're both creative. And that's where we are right now.
So, did anyone have a heart attack or near heart attack when you said you weren't going to go to grad school, but you were going to start a business?
So I was planning to go to graduate school. I went to school and I went to college and got a BFA in 3D fine arts
Okay.
with a concentration in fibers, which is a super obscure degree to have. And in my senior year of college, I felt like there weren't a lot of viable options presented to me for what to do after college.
Mm.
That appealed to me. A lot of it was, a very heavy focus on go out into the world and do your work a part-time job somewhere to sustain your life, but
Yeah.
constantly be applying for like gallery shows and all of this stuff. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. And then the other option that was presented pretty much was like, or go to graduate school. And I was like, well, I love college, so I'll go to graduate school. That's basically just like more college, right? Until I
Yeah.
figure out what I want to do with my life.
Yeah.
And I applied and I got in, I got the scholarship, all this stuff. And then I really would have gone, but there was a lot of like administrative issues between me and the school I was going to go to, the university I was going to go to. And so I ultimately just said, you know what, I'm done putting up with these people.
Yeah.
They've put me through so much, grief already,
Yeah.
and I haven't even become a student there yet. So that was my decision not to go. I think the only people who like were really impacted by that were probably my parents,
Yeah.
who were maybe just a little nervous and
Right.
didn't know, but they
Of
totally
course.
understood where I was coming from. But no one had a heart attack, but it was a little bit, anxiety filled few
Yeah.
months, but it all worked out. I'm glad I didn't end up going.
Yeah.
But even though it was my choice not to go, it was because of things outside of my control,
Yeah.
basically. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the long answer.
Okay. I know. Yeah. I toyed with the idea. I mean, I went to grad school, but I would sometimes say I don't want to go to school, but actually I ended up going because I was one of those people who just liked being in school. I loved
Yeah,
being a student.
right.
I was like,
Yeah,
this is the life. Why do we need to leave? You can just
yeah,
keep coming
exactly.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been happy to be a student for another 2 years,
Yes.
honestly, but just not in that environment. So,
Yeah. Now, how important has it been for you to continue to make, in addition to being a consultant and a resource for other makers?
um, well, first, I want to just say I really hate the word consultant, and I know that that's the word I use. It's just the only word that like
Oh.
makes sense. But I feel like it's like too stuffy for what I do, but it is the word that like translates what I do best.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I feel like as a consultant, it's important for me to keep up with the practice of what I help people do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, that's what I would want if I was looking for someone to help me do something. I'd want to know that they've done it and that they're fresh,
Yeah.
with what they're doing.
Yes.
Not necessarily like I expect them to be the greatest
All
person in the
knowing.
world at what they do in both of
Yeah.
the things that they do, but that they're, aware of, any changes or whatever. So I feel like for me, it's, first of all, I love to run my product-based business and I will always be making something anyway.
Right.
And I am like a maker at heart, but I feel like it's really important for me to maintain that because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me relating to the people I work with.
Yeah.
And, I just think it's important that I'm, right there with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, that we can relate on those things.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. staying connected to the to what your, I don't want to say clients in case you don't like that word either.
Yeah, I know. Like all these words, they
I
make
know.
sense and they're the right word, but they just feel so like corporate to
Yes.
me. But
Yeah,
yes,
they're all kind of
it is the
stuffy.
right word.
But yeah, but staying in the community that you're helping
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah.
So, what is the Merriweather Council? Who is it for? How can people get access to it? I know you provide educational resources, and you have a podcast too, which we need to talk about. But for someone who is brand new to the Merriweather Council, what should they expect?
So the Merriweather Council is, like you said, my collection of my blog, podcast, resources, access to my brain basically in all of these forms. I also have a Facebook group that's free and, anybody can join. So what people can expect from me as like the purveyor of these entities is realistic and concise advice, because I know that people don't have a lot of time to consume content and they'd rather really just be making their work and getting stuff done rather than like running around the internet trying to learn everything. So I try to keep my podcast and blog and, anything that I put out there, I try to keep it as concise as possible, like straight to the point, no fluff, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And realistic, because there's so much stuff out there that's like, yeah, that sounds cool, but it's going to cost $1 million, or it's going to take a ton of time, or you can't do that if you have this, or this going on in your life as well. Yeah. So I try to keep things as realistic as possible for people. Okay. Because there's lots of cool things you could do, but sometimes they're just not realistic.
Yeah.
So realistic and concise advice for makers. I work to empower people to see that what they do has value and that it is valuable to other people. And so all of this is really in pursuit of, I like to say it's like I am in pursuit of, this ideal world that we live in where artists and craftspeople, makers are all, revered in the same way that we revere Target. Like we go out and consume things from handmade sellers, small businesses, and it's not like a special occasion or a novelty or like a big deal. It's just part of what we do. It's just as normal, just as much of a part of our daily lives to consume from small makers as it is to go to Target or Walmart. Okay. So the more that I can help people feel empowered to share their work and to do it well and to sell it, the closer I get to achieving that ideal world vision.
Yeah, that utopia.
So, and so I just, my blog and podcast cover similar topics, just in two different forms, obviously. Yeah. And then I do have my courses, and my Etsy course is like my primary course that people would know about. And then I have a monthly membership as well. Those are like my main things. Okay. So that's what people can expect from me. A little bit of tough love and a lot of realistic and concise advice for getting people, set up and ready to be successful with what they're doing.
Great. Now, do you target mainly just people who sell on Etsy or people who run creative businesses in general, so they can also be trying to sell their products on their own e-commerce site or handmade at Amazon?
I do love my Etsy sellers for sure, but I believe that we have to use Etsy as a tool and we can't stop there. So while most of my people do utilize Etsy, I really want to connect with people who are very interested in using Etsy as a tool and making it work for them, but also in growing their business beyond Etsy. So on and beyond Etsy. Okay. So whether that's your own site or another marketplace, like you said, Amazon, for me, it's really more about business based on craft. So whatever kind of business you're running that's based around your craft, no matter where you're selling it, those would be my people.
Okay,
Most
great.
of them do sell on Etsy as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we talk about that on the podcast quite often, is
Hmm.
using Etsy as a tool in your toolbox,
Right.
but also expanding and branching out. And
Yeah.
speaking of expanding, one of the things that's so incredible that you were able to do was to grow your business from year 1 to year 2. What were some
Yes.
of the things that you did that you think might still work today for somebody who's listening to be able to scale up in, such a, maybe not that dramatic, but still scale up, grow in their
Sure.
business?
Well, I do want to just be clear that this was my only gig. Like I said, I started this right after college and I didn't have any other plans really. Like, I was supposed to do something else entirely. So I wasn't married. I didn't have a kid, no dog, no other obligations. Like it was just me and my only job was to run this business. So I did have a lot of, mental space to deal with all of these things, right? I was
Okay.
able to spend a lot of time. And I know that that's not really the case for everybody, but where we do find common ground here is that like it was, now or never, like it has to work. So,
Yeah.
um, I definitely did grow a lot between year 1 and year 2. One thing I did that I know made a big difference was I cut products that took too much time or weren't profitable. And so subsequent to that would be like knowing what is profitable and what,
Yeah.
is marketable. So understanding your pricing and numbers is really important. I think it takes a little time to get an understanding of those things, but knowing that as soon as possible is huge. And then making decisions based on that is smart. So I cut things that I didn't like to make and that were too much hassle.
Mhm.
And that was huge. And then that gave me the capacity to focus on the things that did sell well and make more of them or make variations of that and try new things to see if those things would sell well. So that was one thing for sure. Anybody could do that today. The
Mhm.
other thing was probably like really tapping into the available tools. So at the time, Instagram was a thing, but it was not a thing the way it is today. In
Mhm.
2010, Instagram was like you could post 40 pictures in a row from your family vacation, and it wasn't no one batted an eyelash
Yeah.
about it. So it was completely different. I like barely used it. So if I could do this without social media, you could
Yeah.
definitely do this today with social media. Tapping into the tools that were available. So like for me, the tool at the time was Etsy. Really low cost, super easy to get started on there. They've even made it easier to get started on there now.
Mhm.
And really paying attention to what they were doing and what they were interested in, and then sort of, you know, appealing to that, like tapping into whatever trends they were into or colors that they were promoting. Back in the day, Etsy was really, really good. And they've gotten better in the past like 8 months about doing this again, but they were really good about telling sellers, this is what we want to see so that we can promote it. And they would
Yeah.
release these like merchandising guides.
Yes.
Now they do an official merchandising guide traditionally like around the holidays, but then they have a couple of like trend people, trend admins, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
who do write blog posts throughout the year about various things. And if you can pay attention to those and really like see what it is that they are interested in, you can work with that language and those ideas and concepts to appeal to their system and not like completely change your work, just like appeal your work to what's, happening on Etsy so that, they can feature you and you can show up better and be more visible.
Yeah. And speaking
Um,
of getting featured, I'm sorry, Danielle, I don't mean to cut you off, but
no,
I
you're
know you have a whole ebook written on how a seller
yeah.
can get featured on Etsy. So, and you go into much more detail about how one can go about doing that if that's
Yeah.
what one desires.
Yes, there's lots to look at that people maybe don't realize, and lots of reasons why you would want to be featured on Etsy. and lots of ways to make it happen. So yes, all of that is in the ebook, which maybe you can link people to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all those tips and tricks in there. So those are like the two main things, like really just like leveraging the tools available and like making them work,
Okay.
and then cutting out what isn't working for you, like, in the back end.
Okay. And speaking about that, how much time do you typically recommend for a maker to give a product before deciding it's not working and it's time to cut that one out and move on?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there is like a hard and fast, like give it a year, give it 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that you'll, depending on your relationship to the product, it might be easier or harder to give it a longer or shorter period of time. But I think a year is probably a good amount to generally ballpark it, because maybe, it is seasonal and you don't realize it, or it might just appeal better to a certain season. It might really just depend on your own promotion of the product. It might just take a little bit of tweaking. So, yeah, I think a year is fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Typically, if you're trying to phase out a particular product or product line, do you advise sellers to put them on sale, cut the costs, or just donate it and get some kind of tax write-off?
Generally, I would tell somebody to try to sell it, because then you can recoup some of those costs. It might depend on how much volume there is, or, what it is exactly. But especially in the case of Etsy, if you have a listing on Etsy, you always want that listing ultimately to get sold in one way or another. So even if it means putting it on sale to get it sold, it's always better to have a sold out listing on Etsy than one that you deleted or deactivated because of any backlinks that might be going to that product.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's always better to have a sold out listing. So if it is on Etsy, I would say try to get it sold. Do what you can. And I think a sale is totally acceptable if you're like retiring something or you just want to clear space. Sales can be really strategic as well. So that's kind of a win-win.
Okay. Great. Well, that makes sense. In general, do you think running sales, even on popular products, is a good idea? Or are you of the mindset that if a product is doing well and making good sales, there's no reason to cut into that profit?
Generally, yes, that is my mindset, is if it's doing well on its own and things are chugging along, then yeah, leave it be. But I also do believe that sales can be and should be mutually beneficial to the seller and the buyer. So if you, let's say you just, something comes up in your life and you need a big chunk of money, or you want to clear space in your studio, get some stuff out the door, or you need to order supplies, or whatever the case may be, if you want to generate a lot of money in a short period of time, a sale can be really good for you as a business owner, as long as, there's something of value coming out of it for you.
Right.
So whether that's profit or, just instant cash flow or cleared space in your studio or whatever the case may be, that's of value to you. And then obviously the value for your customer is in, the opportunity to maybe try the product for the first time if they're a new customer, or get stock up on a product they already know they love. I'm a big fan of controlled and occasional sales as opposed to coupons for everything. Coupons when you sign up for something, coupons when you make a purchase, coupons for this, coupons for that. So like if it's a controlled and like isolated sale and you're kind of using it to your own benefit and to reward people who have been following you or, have stuck with you on social media or whatever, I think that is a good idea to do occasionally.
Okay. And on the topic of money, something else that a lot of sellers, especially new sellers who are still trying to establish their standing on Etsy, struggle with is pricing and how to price their products properly so that one, the prices are attractive enough to garner sales, but also so that they're making a profit and not just
Yeah.
paying to sell on Etsy.
Right. Yeah, pricing is really hard. And I think that, well, I know actually that there's so much more that goes into it than people think at first. Like on the surface, it's like, okay, here's my costs and here's a formula. I put in a bunch of numbers and it gives me something. And then usually people do a formula like that, and the number that comes out of their calculator, it feels astronomical to them. So they
Yeah.
just cut it in half
Yes.
and move on. Or they go on Etsy and they search for something similar to what they're selling, and they get, a sense of the price that other people are charging. And then they pick a price that's like mid to low, the average of that, and they're on their way. And neither of those are great ways to price things. It's really important to look to be honest with yourself. Like if you are brand new and you have no credibility whatsoever, you do have to go in on the lower end. That doesn't mean you have to be operating at a loss. It just means it's smarter to go in at the lower end of things and work your way up a little bit, because as you make more sales, as you get more coverage, more exposure, more people know who you are, that you want to leave room for that increase. So there's so much that goes into it, but I think people really need to just be honest with themselves about their actual numbers, the numbers that you would plug into a calculator, and then feeling secure in their own value and seeing their own worth, which is really just a self-esteem thing.
Yeah.
So that number that they get from their formula will feel less intimidating.
Yeah.
Because if you truly understand your value and your worth, and you know how to translate that to other people, which of course is a whole other thing, but if you can have an understanding of those things, then that number might not feel as intimidating, what you should be pricing your things at.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of just trust the process and like really give it a lot of thought, but don't undersell yourself. That doesn't do anyone any favors. It doesn't do you any favors. It doesn't do the community any favors.
Right.
So it's really important that people just be really honest with themselves about their own numbers and their own worth.
What do you think the best way for a seller to track whether or not they're actually paying themselves as a creative business owner is? So it's one thing to price the product, but then one has to take into consideration overhead costs as well. At the end of the day or the month, we want to make sure that we're also getting paid, not just selling our products and making a profit on the products, but actually getting a living wage, a living income.
Right. Ultimately we all are doing this so that we can pay for things in our lives, right? Like whether those are things we need or things we want or both. I think that there's lots of ways that one could go about paying themselves. I know some people like to divide their like they do everything, and then at the end of the month they take what is left of a certain amount, like in their bank account. They'll leave a certain amount in the bank for operating costs. They'll take, another third of it and they'll put it to themselves. And then another third of it, they'll invest in something, like they put it in savings or they use it to buy some kind of an investment or whatever. There's lots of ways that people can do this. For me, what I've always done is I obviously, try to do my best to make my sales. And then once a month, or sometimes I've done this once a month, sometimes I've done it quarterly, I will then go in and pay myself whatever amount, usually like a percentage of that time period profits or sales or whatever.
Okay.
So it is hard, and I think this is going to change per person and per situation. But it's really just important to be able to see that there is increase in the balance. And for most people, they don't catch on to this until it's maybe like a little bit later. the best way to do that is to have a separate business account. So you're
Yeah.
not operating out of your own like personal checking account or whatever. If
Yes.
you can separate it, it'll make it so much easier to see the financial health of the business.
Mhm.
Of course, there's always the option to register as an S corp and put yourself on payroll, but most of us are not. Most people are not at that level. But it's
Yeah.
important to just be able to see those numbers, and that's why isolating them in their own account is huge. And so then you can like feel good about, maybe you're not paying yourself every single month right away, but you can see clearly it's going up, it's going up. I'm earning, and then I can come up with a strategy for myself that's going to allow me to have a schedule for when I pay myself and how much that's going to be.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to say I don't know if you watch Shark Tank. I do,
Of
and
course. Love Shark Tank.
yes, and one of them I don't recall which one of them believes, I think it's Mark
Hmm.
Cuban, that you can't pay yourself right away when you're
Right.
growing a business.
Yep.
Do you believe the same thing too? Because I think with creative businesses it can be different, but he might choose to disagree. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that we shouldn't pay ourselves right away? I understand we should reinvest in the business, but
Mhm.
should we be operating at zero income, personal income?
For me, I think it's less about should we and
Hmm.
more about what is likely or what is, smart. To me, it makes sense to go into it thinking, okay, I'm going to give myself 6 or 8 months if I
Hmm.
can. Like, obviously, you have to make these decisions going into this, like to build up from whatever job you currently have, a
Yeah.
savings, or, again, this is going to be different for everybody, but
Yeah.
um, I think it's smart to expect to not be paying yourself monthly for at least like a few months.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I know it's so funny on Shark Tank when people come in. I've seen this a few times, and they're like, "We're looking for this much money," and then they ask them what are they using it for, and some of the people they're like, "Well, we're going to use $300,000 of it to back pay ourselves," and they're like, "No way!
Yeah.
Like I'm not giving you money so that you can pay yourself for something
Right.
that hasn't even, you can't even sustain it yourself yet because you're here." And no, like it's so funny because obviously we all want to be paid for the work that we're doing, but I think the sacrifice to having this kind of a lifestyle long term is, sacrificing that little bit of income for a few months to make this work.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think most people realize that you have to have some kind of padding when you're going
Hmm.
into business.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's a fast track to living in your car or somewhere.
Right. Which is why I mean, when I first graduated and
Hmm.
started my business, my parents were sort of supporting me for a little while
Yeah.
because I think, that was the plan originally. They were going to help me through grad school. And then that
Right.
didn't happen. um, but I was like, I got to make this work. Otherwise, my parents are going to make me get a real job.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
All right. So let's talk about running a business. One of the things that a lot of us tend to struggle with is managing our time and deciding and determining what activities of running that business we need to focus on and when.
hmm
Can
yeah.
you help give some direction to somebody who's floundering now with, how much time do I spend making? How much time should I spend marketing? How much time should I spend with, you know, other activities, sourcing, etc. All these little
hmm
things that once you're actually running a business, you realize, take up more time than you thought.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, like, I think time management is so hard because from day to day, the things that we have to manage change for a lot of us. And I know I don't have kids. I assume that with kids it's even harder because
Mm-hmm.
you have to manage your time around their time too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is like kind of like the elusive, like, can the humans figure it out? um, everybody has different things to manage. So the way that they're managing it is going to change, and then it changes from day to day. So like, I'll be honest, like I don't have very great time management skills. What I think has helped me the most is identifying what is a waste of time and doing less of it.
Yeah.
Especially in business. Like, I work with a lot of people who are like, I have to do blogging and Pinterest and Twitter and Instagram and my Etsy shop, and then I got to send a newsletter and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, you don't have to do all of those concurrently, and you don't have to do all of those at all. Like, I started cutting things out like early on, like, okay, Twitter is useless, cut it out. We don't have to think about that anymore. Blogging doesn't have to be once a week or twice a week. It can be like once every 3 months, and it's okay. Like, there are certain things that you have to kind of go through this mess of figuring out what works for you first in order to know what's worth spending time on in the future. So I think there's a lot of pressure for people to like get it right away. And it's not realistic. Yeah. Everyone is going to be scattered and all over the place for the first like year or two. I think that's just normal, because you're just figuring out your own for yourself, what you even want to be doing and how you want to be doing it, and then what's going to work for you individually. So, you have to have that experience of getting things. It's kind of like it has to get worse before it gets better. Mm-hmm. You have to go through all that mess and struggle before you can sort out what is going to be a structured part of your day.
Yeah.
So, I think everyone should just feel the best advice I can give someone is to be okay with that.
Yeah.
To be okay with it being a little messy and not knowing exactly what you're doing for a little while, and don't feel guilty about it. And not having that pressure to do every single thing every single day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're right. I know just from having talked to other people about, primarily selling on Etsy, but also in the bigger scheme of things, running a creative business or a handmade business, there is that pressure early on to get it all right away, which is not realistic.
Right.
And so eventually some of us, like you said, figure out, okay, this particular thing is not working for me. I need to let it go. I need to cut it off. I need to just move on.
Right.
But at the same time, we do need to have some type of web presence established. Yep. So what strategies do you advise people that you work with to use to establish and maintain or leverage a web presence? And I understand we don't all have to be everywhere,
right?
But what would you tell somebody that you were working with?
Yeah, usually what I tell people is to get on Etsy first, because it is so accessible. Like we said, low barrier to entry in terms of cost, and they make it really easy. Like, they won't even let you open your shop until you've done all the things. Like, it won't even let you move forward until you've filled out all the things you have to fill out. So they make it easy in that way. And it is like a very good place to have a presence, because it attracts so many people to it on its own. You don't have to work to get all those millions of people going there. And then you can work to, and this is what I teach in my Etsy course too, is taking that unique power of Etsy and leveraging it for your own shop. So Etsy's bringing in all of these people who are buyers and influencers, publishers, editors, all this stuff. And we can, sort of funnel those people into our own shops by appealing to like Etsy search and Etsy features and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's like the first thing I tell people is that's a great place to start. And also, by virtue of being on Etsy, you learn the things that you would want to bring with you or leave behind when you start your own site. There's so many things. We obviously hear people complain about Etsy all the time. I wish they did this. I wish they did that. Well, guess what? Now when you go to build your own site, you can have that, whatever that thing is that you wanted. So it gives you that experience that you can take with you when you move on to build your own site. So in addition to Etsy, I usually say, let's get that up and running first. Then we do want to establish some kind of domain name for yourself. Whether that's a site you're going to sell on, right away or not. We want to have like yourbrand.com and some kind of like a landing page that tells people about you, your work, your process, whatever you want them to know. So you can send people to yourbrand.com instead of etsy.com,
Right.
in your marketing. And then once you have those things, or concurrently, pick one social media that you like to use daily. Usually it's Instagram, which makes sense. Everyone loves Instagram. And then I like to tell people, pick something that's kind of like passive. Like Pinterest is pretty good for passive advertising because it doesn't take a ton of time. And then it's sort of power of the people. Other people will do the work for you, repinning and stuff like that. So if I had to rank them, in terms of like when to do what, I would say start with Etsy, then establish your own, domain or site, landing page, whatever. Okay. And then 2 other things, usually Instagram and Pinterest.
Okay. And you said one social media platform for daily use, and that would be something like Instagram. Daily use, do you advocate like once a day posting, or just what you can do on a daily basis? So if someone is able to post multiple times a day, and now Etsy makes it really easy with their social media tool, even in the app. But can one ever post too much?
I think there is definitely like a threshold for what is, too much on Instagram. But then again, if you have it, or if something is actively going on, it's okay maybe to post more during certain times. I think once a day is fine, twice a day is fine, 3 times a day is fine, whatever you want to do. Of course, then there's like stories, which is a little easier. You don't have to think quite as much about them. You can post 1,000 of those a day and no one cares. So it's kind of, I think, at first, once a day, get into the habit of doing it is good. Yeah. But then I think where people get like the wheels veer off the path here is that they're focused on their own account more than on their own presence. Meaning like they're very focused on like posting. What should I post? As opposed to what should I do? Meaning like, because it is social, like go out and find people to be social with, look for your ideal customers, try to, strike up conversations with other people or influencers. So it's less about, or not less about, but like equal parts post to your own account and actually use the platform for what it is designed to do, which is connect you to other people, not just connect other people to you.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I never thought about that, but that makes so much sense. And I think I'm guilty.
No, we all are, because it's so easy. It's easier to focus on our own stuff than it is to like go out there and be social, but
yes,
it can be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm sure I can. And I have to say, I and probably there are, there's somebody else listening to this that has the same mindset as me. I think social media is a chore. I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I do it because, like you said, if you're running a business, you have to have a presence somewhere online. And so, social media is a part of that. And I don't dislike it when I'm in the midst of it. Like if I'm interacting with people and communicating there, sometimes I truly do enjoy it. And when I think about it, I enjoy it more when I'm, interacting with other people and what they're doing. What the chore for me is when I think, okay, I need to promote this, or I need to put a post about this. How do I word it? What do I say? How do I attract people to this? That's the chore for me. The fun part is just looking at what other people are doing and, playing around with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely gone through phases where I feel like, yes, I love Instagram and every post is great and easy to compose. And then other times there's like weeks go by and I'm like, should probably post something of relevance. Yes. It just like feels so intimidating.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like a solution to that. It just kind of is. But I think for, I always say Instagram because I know that a lot of people, that's the first place they go, but it doesn't have to be Instagram. It could be, YouTube, or if you prefer to make videos, then static images, like do that. If you prefer to have graphic posts instead of images, do that. Like you can make it appeal to what you like to do.
Yeah.
If there's a certain thing you like to create more of.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm glad you brought that up because I think YouTube is one of the mediums or
mhm.
media, I don't know the word, but that is a great platform, but we don't, well, at least on the podcast, I don't talk about it as much
Mhm.
when I have social media conversations with other people. Just because, well, part of that is my fault because I'm afraid of video. And so I don't
Mhm.
focus that much on it. But I know that there are people who find great success using YouTube as their social media platform,
Mhm.
especially if you're good with video, you're good on video. You don't even have to be good on video.
Yep.
But I don't think it's as widely tapped into,
Mhm.
especially in the creative community, or I should say Etsy sellers, as it could be.
Right. Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, YouTube is insanely powerful.
Mhm.
Um, for me, I'm like a super tech nerd and I love to do video and audio and all this stuff. And even I don't have YouTube. So it's, I can definitely see that being an intimidating factor to it. But there are ways, if you're the kind of person who likes to make videos and post them to your story on Instagram or to your feed on Instagram, like it's that same thing, just maybe like a little longer for
Yeah.
YouTube. Like it doesn't have to be like a Steven Spielberg production. It can be, it's just another place to be visible. But if
Yeah.
you are into it, then it's a really great platform for you to really put your time and effort into. So it
Yeah.
really depends what you like and where you want to spend your time.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I have to confess something. I meant to say this earlier when you said Instagram stories, they're so easy. And I messed up on Instagram stories.
Oh.
Yes, that's how non-technical I am. The first time I did Instagram stories, at least I thought I did, someone someone responded. I had just done it like a regular feed post, but I thought I had done a story, and goes, did you mean this to be a story? I'm like, yeah, isn't it a story? And he's like, no, it's not.
Aw. No, you know what? I think the first few times it was a little confusing, like what exactly is the process here?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's funny. Nothing to feel bad about.
Now, speaking of making mistakes, what are some of the most common ones that you see Etsy sellers or creative business owners in general making when it comes to running their creative businesses or their handmade businesses that are easy enough to avoid?
Yeah, I actually just did a podcast about this recently. This is like my new like one mistake people make over and over thing.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of times people will send me emails and they're like, my goal is to make X number of dollars per month or X number of sales per month. And then a lot of times people will send me links to their shop, and unfortunately I can't spend all of my day on Etsy, but occasionally I will click through. And I'm like, see a pattern over and over that their shop is not established to support the goal that they set. So even if they sold like everything in their shop, they wouldn't make the amount of money that they want to make. And they just don't even realize that they don't even have the inventory to make the money that they want to make. So that's relatively easy to fix in the sense that you could adjust your goal, or
Yeah.
you could know going into it that you have to have X number of pieces, or
Yeah.
you have to have a process for replenishing your shop to hit that money goal. And it's funny because people don't even realize that they're not capable of reaching that money goal because of what's in their shop. But then they also don't realize like they're setting themselves up for failure, because the month is going to come and go and they're not going to hit that goal because they couldn't have. And then they get discouraged and they give up. So it's, if you could know that ahead of time and just check, your goal against your inventory or your process, it's going to save a lot of headache.
Yeah. And that makes sense when you say it, but you're right. It's true. I think we come up with lofty goals, but then when you actually backtrack and break it down, you realize you're not where, I shouldn't say you, but we might not be doing the little things that we need to actually be doing to get to those goals.
Right. Like sometimes I see this all the time. We get so caught up in marketing that we forget that what we're actually marketing isn't good enough yet. Like we have to actually, the thing that we're sending the traffic to needs to be like as up to snuff as possible.
Yeah.
And you want that traffic to have a place to go. And so you really have to, because it's fun to get on Instagram and post pictures or whatever, right? But it's less fun to be like, oh, I got to add more listings to my shop.
Yes.
But those are the things that actually ultimately will matter in the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And speaking of less fun, I have a pile I am looking at of things to list. So.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Me too. I have things literally from holiday 2016 that haven't been listed yet, and I'm like, I'll get to that eventually.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm like, oh, one day I will.
Yeah.
Or I wake
it's
up in the
not
morning
fun.
and no, it's not fun. It's not the fun
Yeah.
part. Definitely isn't. And I know someone is listening right now who is still considering opening their Etsy shop. You have to be realistic. There are some not fun parts of running a creative business, but they're essential.
Right.
And you can't succeed if you don't deal with the parts that aren't as much fun to do as, the other parts that you enjoy a bit more.
Exactly.
Now, I know in your course, you talk about things that sellers can do. And specifically, I'm talking about your Etsy training course. You go over some things that most people overlook that help in actually getting more traffic to your store and increasing your sales. So without giving away all your secret sauce, just as in general terms, how would you advise sellers to go about getting organic, or if necessary, paid traffic or exposure, I should say, to their products outside of Etsy?
Yeah. So I think that the most for me, let me just say, I don't usually advise sending paid traffic. Like if you're going to pay for an ad or something, I don't usually advise to send that to Etsy, because there's no reasonable expectation that person will stay in your Etsy shop. Like we actually counted once, and there's like more than 120 links on any given page of Etsy that lead outside of your shop. So you basically, when you send traffic from a paid ad or whatever to your Etsy shop, you're basically just sending traffic to Etsy. So the rest of us thank you, but it's really not the smartest decision. So if you're going to do paid anything, send it to your own site where there's no other competition, where it's just you, it's your site.
Yes,
there's less likelihood that people just click away. And you know what, when people aren't familiar with Etsy, they click away and they don't even realize they've clicked away and they're in someone else's shop now.
Yeah.
So you really want to consider that when doing paid advertising. That's just one little thing I want to mention. But I think one of the best ways people can send traffic to anything, on their own site or Etsy, although I would advise you always do this to your own site, is to work with influencers. Yes. Basically like brand reps. Some people will call them brand reps, brand ambassadors.
Okay.
That's basically like tapping into your customer base and finding people who are really excited about your products, and then encouraging them to share more about them, and leveraging what they're doing to work for you. So like if they're going to post awesome pictures of their kids wearing your product or whatever, that's awesome. People love to see other people using and enjoying wearing whatever the product, the same way people love to hear like good reviews about a product.
Yeah.
Just more powerful in an image. That's one thing that's always really, really powerful if it's done correctly. And then I think in terms of sending traffic, like unpaid, just organic, is to really appeal to what people look for. Like on Etsy, you always want to appeal to Etsy's search and that kind of thing. But you can do that on your own site too, by appealing to like a Google search. Obviously, Google is a much larger pool than Etsy, so it's a little harder, but blogging is really effective. And if people feel intimidated by blogging, then usually we can sort of pull that into, you know, either social media or email marketing. But I think blogging is great because you get all that like SEO juju.
Yes.
Like those keywords are out there and Google can see it and people can see it. So blogging is great for sending traffic to things. You know, you can write posts. There's an episode about this too on my podcast, actually, blogging for product sellers. You can write posts and link to your own items in those posts, and that drives traffic. So, you know, there's lots of ways blogging is effective. So that's definitely a good one. So blogging and influencers, I guess, are the two.
Okay.
But don't send the paid traffic to Etsy.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. Especially when you said you counted there were at least 120 links outside your shop. That's a sobering statistic for me.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of, diversion and distraction.
Yeah.
Now, speaking about blogging, I'm glad you mentioned blogging for product sellers, and I will link to Danielle's podcast. It's the Merriweather Council podcast, so that you can check that out, or you can just go directly to iTunes and subscribe to that as well. But should our blogging efforts be focused solely on blogging about the products that we're selling? And if not, should we be doing keyword research into other peripheral topics to, you know, what we're doing or to the products that we sell or our business, and talking about that also in blogs?
I think it's going to really depend on the person's audience and their objectives to determine what they should blog about. Some people have products that appeal to audiences that have a lot of complementary, supplementary, peripheral topics that they could cover that their audience would love to read about. Other people's audience, they don't like to read anything at all. So it's going to kind of depend on your audience. I think it's always nice to do posts where you can link to your own product in some capacity, but that doesn't have to be every single post. Okay. You know, I think it really does. I mean, I know I keep saying it depends on the person, it depends on the audience, but it really does. And that's why knowing who your target customer is so important, because it really makes all of these other decisions so much easier to make. Okay.
Now, Danielle, there's a resource that you offer that has caught my attention, and I just want to make sure we talk about it as we're rounding up. It's your Handmade Shop Owners Communication Kit. This is like a first. What's that all about? Who is it for? And what can we expect to get from it?
So the communication kit is basically like pre-written scripts for answering difficult or awkward questions from customers and also from peers, mostly customers, but also peers. So this came about because I was in Facebook groups, my own Facebook group included, where the same questions were being asked over and over. How do I respond to this? How do I respond to that? How do I respond to this? And it's like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel really every time. Also, people sometimes feel like intimidated to respond to things the way that they really like to respond. So they do this long, drawn out process of responding, and there's a back and forths because they forgot to mention something up front or whatever. And so the communication kit basically makes it so you're structuring your responses in a way that you are eliminating the possibility of having 1,000 subsequent responses.
Yeah.
And you are, mitigating drama ahead of time and just like getting things done. Because I know for a lot of people, they get messages, they don't know how to respond to them. They let them sit for a while, and then it's so much worse.
Yes.
And so that's really what that is just like my go-to, like, here's what I would say to this person. Okay. Here's why I would say it.
Yeah.
And here's, if that doesn't work for you, maybe try this.
Oh, okay.
So you just get it done.
Nice. That's very helpful. Can you make one for just life in general, please?
I know, right?
All right. Now, Danielle, before I let you go, if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way that they can? And also, if they want to just get a taste of what it's like to work with you and the courses that you offer, you have a free Etsy course, right?
Yeah, I have it's a free email series. It's called Etsy Lessons, which people can access by going to merri.party/Etsy Lessons Convo. That's the special link for your people. And that's a free email series. You sign up every day for like a week. You get another Etsy lesson delivered to your inbox. That includes a couple of video lessons. One of them is like a 20-minute SEO training. So that's really a good place to start. And then if people are interested in other things, of course, merriweathercouncil.com, merriweathercouncilblog.com. Those are my two main hubs. But of course, merriweathercouncil.com will get you to everything. That's where you could find the Etsy course. You could find the podcast. And of course, the blog is linked to there as well.
Okay.
And then if they want to join us in that Facebook group I mentioned, it's clhl.club, which stands for Creative Life, Happy Life .club.
.club. Okay.
Yes.
And then just one more time, the link so they can either go to merriweathercouncil.com, which I will link to, and sign up for the free Etsy course. But you also have a link, and that's merri.party. I missed the rest.
merri.party /Etsy Lessons Convo.
Okay.
That's, I don't think that you can get to the Etsy lessons otherwise from merriweathercouncil.com. So that's the link to that.
Okay, so I will link to that as well so that anyone who wants to get access to that will be able to as well.
Awesome.
And what's the best way they can reach you? Just go to the Merriweather Council and fill out your contact form?
Yes, if you go to merriweathercouncil.com, my email is there. There's a contact form.
Okay.
You can find all my social media handles. I'm pretty accessible through those channels.
Okay. Danielle, thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing all the information that you did and this free Etsy course as well. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. And I am thankful that we could finally get to have you on the podcasts.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was so nice to chat with you.
Yes, and hopefully we'll meet again at the next, if ever, Etsy Up conference.
Yes, I hope so.
All right. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back next week.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.